Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Military Images senior editor Phil Spoggy submitted his latest column of Arms and Men, and I began editing it today. The column explores a wonderful image of a company of Pennsylvania cavalry troopers posed on Lookout Mountain with their Sharps carbines. More to come when it's published next month. Editing is still in progress. Phil dedicates the column to his good friend, Eric Wittenberg, who recently passed away after a losing battle with cancer. Historian, author, lecturer, tour guide, and battlefield preservationist, Eric was well known to many of you students in the Civil War and the larger community. Phil included a quote in his dedication to Eric. The quote is by a Confederate soldier, Berry Greenwood Benson. It's an often quoted passage that dates to May 4th, 1864. The version that Phil featured reads, "But one day in the beginning of May, the long roll beat for a deeper purpose, and falling in, we marched away from our log cabins forever, left them forever. Yet who knows? Who knows but it may be given to us after this life to meet again in the old quarters, to play chess and draughts, to get up soon, to answer morning roll call, to fall in at the tap of the drum for drill and dress parade, and again to hastily do our own war gear while the monotonous patter of the long roll summons to battle. Who knows but again the old flags, ragged and torn, snapping in the wind, may face each other and flutter, pursuing and pursued, while the cries of victory fill a summer day. And after the battle, then the slain and the wounded will rise, and all will meet together under the two flags, all sound and well. And there will be talking and laughing and cheers, and all will say, 'Did it not seem real? Was it not as in the old days?'" A fitting tribute to Eric. May he rest in peace. Some of you students of the Civil War will recall this passage, a similar version in books by Bruce Catton and Shelby Foote, and in Ken Burns' miniseries, The Civil War. So, who exactly was Berry Benson? Born in South Carolina in 1843, his memoirs, published in 1962 and again in 1992, tell the story of his exploits as a foot soldier in Stonewall Jackson's army, missing the Battle of Gettysburg, a stint as a scout and a sharpshooter, a prisoner of war who escaped from Elmira, his return to the Confederate Army, and the surrender at Appomattox. To residents of Augusta, Georgia, where he lived and died in 1923, Benson is remembered as the veteran who posed for the city's Confederate monument statue. And of course, here he is, here in his prime. Benson's military service record, which is spotty and seemingly incomplete, corroborates some of the claims. By all accounts, he served in Company H of the 1st South Carolina Infantry, a regiment commanded by Colonel Maxcy Gregg, who went on to become a brigadier general and a brigade commander until mortally wounded at Fredericksburg. Benson began his service as a private and made his way to first sergeant. I want to share an example of Benson's writing. This passage is from his memoirs, and it describes his experience at Appomattox. Several generals are mentioned, including Robert E. Lee, Samuel McGowan, and Joseph Johnston. Benson also mentions his brother Blackwood, his company captain John G. Barnwell, and a few other soldiers. Benson begins, "On April 9th, 1865, we reached the neighborhood of Appomattox and came to halt and were drawn up in line. As we marched through a field, I saw the sergeant major and two other prisoners whom we had taken in tow on the night of the 2nd, now safe in the hands of our prisoner's guard. And as we passed, we exchanged greetings. As I remember it, I wished him good treatment in prison and an early exchange, and he thanked me in all seriousness, neither recognizing the absurdity of it. Over to the left, some fighting was going on, and the sharpshooters were ordered forward. We marched down across an open field to a stream, some 6 yards wide, perhaps, crossing on a log thrown across it, and formed on the other side, the enemy's ground. We were about to advance to the attack when, to our surprise, we were recalled. We marched over to the big road, entering it near a house on top of which floated a large yellow flag, the hospital flag. As we marched up the road toward our brigade, we saw a queer sight. Through the field, close by the road, a piece of artillery was being driven, and the drivers were artillerymen. Accompanying it were all Yankees. We didn't understand, but somebody said we had just captured the piece, and its own men were being made to drive it into our lines. Then I saw a federal officer come galloping in, carrying aloft a white handkerchief. What did this mean? Had we surrounded a small body of the enemy, and were they about to surrender? Presently, the whisper began to pass from mouth to mouth that it was a flag of truce and that General Lee was about to surrender. I remember with what surprise and utter discredit I heard the rumor. The thought had never actually entered my mind before, hard pressed as I knew we were. The idea was simply preposterous, and I hooted it. There'd been surrenders and there would be surrenders, but General Lee's army surrender? Never. The firing had all ceased, and we saw Confederate regiments returning from the field of battle. And now the whole army, and a small one it was, gathered together on a low hill over against Appomattox. And along the ridge of hills opposite were stretched the long, dark lines of the enemy. They lay directly in our front, blocking our further retreat. We were drawn up in column of regiments, I believe, and ordered to stack arms. And then the rumor grew louder and more assured that we were indeed about to surrender. I took alarm. We were not kept to our pieces, but were let to wander about, resting under the trees, and there the enemy was in full view, and no fighting anywhere. I looked up Captain Barnwell and asked him what he knew. He knew nothing, but thought it was not improbable that General Lee was about to surrender. I looked up General McGowan and begged him to tell me whether he knew. He did not know for certain, but then I told him I would not say if a surrender was about to be made. I had been in prison once. I was not going again. I would make my way out and join General Johnston in North Carolina. General McGowan advised me not to act hastily, wait until surrender became certain, then, if I would, to go. I talked with Blackwood, his brother. He was ready to follow me anywhere. I did not want many companions and spoke to only one other. This was Bell. Old Gator was his nickname. Yes, he would go with us anywhere, to Texas if we said so. But Gator had a friend, Clark, who was Bell's neighbor at home. Bell looked up to him and thought very much of him and could not leave without telling him goodbye. So Bell went off to the wagon train where Clark was, and Blackwood and I waited. Presently, Gator returned, tears in his eyes, and declared he could not make up his mind to leave Clark. As he was in great doubt as to what he ought to do, we all went together to Clark to talk about it. The upshot of it was that Bell decided to remain with Clark. Shortly before this, I gone to General McGowan again to ask whether we were really going to surrender. I'd found him in the woods, crying, half dressed, taking off his old, dirty uniform and putting on a newer, brighter one used on state occasions. I did not then need his acknowledgement of our miserable fate. His face and the changing of his uniform were enough. By that time, it had got to be well known among the men that Lee had determined to surrender, and it was a lamentable spectacle to see how the men took it. Some seemed to be glad that it was all over, but even they, I have no doubt, would have been as ready to charge as the rest, had it been so ordered. But mostly they were sad and gloomy faces. For myself, I cried. I could not help it. And all about were men crying, plenty of them. We left General McGowan crying, and Clark and Bell also. I had in my pocket $2, a greenback bill which father had sent me in a letter. Hearing it reported that the terms of surrender stipulated parole for all privates and non commissioned officers, but that commissioned officers would be sent to northern prisons, I looked up Captain Barnwell and gave him the money. At first, he refused to take it, but telling him that he would need it bad enough in prison, I pressed it upon him so that he could not refuse. So Blackwood and I left the little tattered, weary, sad, and weeping army, our army, left them there on the hill with their arms stacked in the field, all in rows, never to see it any more. Telling Clark and Bell goodbye, we crossed the road into the untenanted fields and thickets, and in a little while lost sight of all that was told of the presence of what was left of the army that through 4 long years, time and time again, had beaten back its enemy, keeping Richmond, its capital, safe and sound. Carrying our rifles, skulking through thick bushes and behind trees, or now crawling along in a ditch to conceal ourselves, now hiding in a fence corner, we at last eluded the vigilance of the enemy's pickets and made good our way out of his lines. Then we set off on our march to join General Johnston in North Carolina. So there you have Benson's narrative. Now, you may be wondering if Benson and his brother Blackwood made it to Joe Johnston's army. According to an editorial note in his memoirs, it turns out they did, arriving on April 19th as rumors circulated that Johnston was preparing to surrender. But rather than wait, the Benson boys took off again, this time for home. They arrived in Augusta on May 15th, 1865, having never formally surrendered. Now that's the story at the end of the memoirs by the editor. Benson's military service record tells a slightly different story. A document in that record states that he received a parole at Appomattox on April 9th, 1865. But thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.